Okay. Nostalgia? Mishu? Anybody here grow up with Nechama? Raise your hand. Yeah! Nechama! So I grew up in Miami to Israeli parents. And all of the books and movies that they gave me when I was a child were in Hebrew, so that I would learn the language before the English took over my brain. Makes sense, and it worked because I speak Hebrew now and I live here now. And one of my favorite books growing up was Hakina Nechama by Meir Shalev. This was a story about a louse, which if you don't know means lice in singular. It's disgusting, I know. It's about a louse who decided that she doesn't want to live in the same head for the rest of her life. She doesn't want people to hate her for the rest of her life. She wants to get out there and travel the world. She wants to, visit other heads in different cities. She wants to make friends and maybe fall in love. But as you can imagine, nobody likes Nechama, and everybody wants her gone. And she keeps traveling and searching until she accidentally finally makes it to the head of a bald man who's very, very excited to have her because he now has the same problem as people with hair. And they become friends and live happily ever after. This is a ridiculous story, and most of you already know it, so why am I telling it here today? My name is Avital. I'm the regional developer advocate at Vonage. And when I joined a while back and learned about our communications platform and the millions of messages that make their way in this platform and go on a journey of 5, 10, 15 stops in just milliseconds and end up where they need to be, I thought of this little louse, one in a million, right? That I loved as a kid, who eventually made it to where she needed to be. Her perfect match, and this was a long journey, but she got there. It was an absolute miracle. The thing is, though, that in children's books, things are happily ever after, but in the real world of, everything in the real life, things don't go as planned, notifications never make it to where they need to go, objects get lost, and the rebels never make it back home. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the real life of infrastructure engineering, and I'd like to do that in the context of the platform that I mentioned earlier. The Vonage Business Communications Platform, it has capabilities for voice, video, messaging, and voicemail, and it is home to about 150,000 users who, through all of those functionalities, produce 800 notifications per second. And the kicker is that all of these notifications are processed in under 15 milliseconds because that is the kind of standards you and I are used to nowadays. So how do we keep track of these 800 notifications, ensure that they're going where they need to go? How do we, follow every step of that journey? How do we make sure that the rogue notifications get to where they need to get? To answer that, I'd like to begin with a journey of a cute little notification, starting from the very beginning to when your laptop makes a connection through the client to what we call the bus station, because this entire thing that we're going to talk about now is called the bus. This is the first point where the client can make an introduction. It says, hey, I belong to John's computer and I would like to sign up for notifications. The bus station pings its API, which we called Frizzle because we're clever and the children's books references never end. About the new connection. All of the relevant information gets stored. Frizzle communicates with the message broker, which creates a queue for your particular user, and with the help of the message protocol, determines the queue to put your messages in. The protocol returns a URL, and thus a WebSocket connection is formed between your client and this thing that we call the bus. And then, when someone sends a message to you, it hits Frizzle. Frizzle sends the notification to the message broker, which sends it to the socket connection that you have open. Easy, right? But wait. What about the phones, the mobile devices? We can't maintain a WebSocket connection open with your phone at all times. So what about those push notifications that I mentioned in the title of my talk? Well, when you fire up the VBC app on your phone, on your device, a very similar flow happens. Your phone connects to the bus station, it introduces itself with your ID, information about your device, and something called a push token. Now, in the app, you have preferences regarding which notifications you would like to receive. Maybe you only want to get notifications for messages, but not for calls. Maybe for calls, not for messages. Maybe you only want to get notifications about direct messages. So in that introduction, all that app is sending all that information about your preferences. The API handles and stores away this information, and you are now signed up to receive notifications. And now, the part that I left out in the previous flow goes like this. When someone sends you a message and Frizzle sends a notification to your queue that we see below, it actually also sends it in parallel to the bus HTTP service. This is a very generic HTTP service that we wrote in Node, and it knows whether you've signed up for push notifications and whether to forward your messages to PushMe. PushMe is another really great Node service that we wrote. It has a database of push tokens. These are the things that are linked to your device, which identify your app, and that they're mapped to each user and tells it which operating system to send to, and then which device to send to. But PushMe is not only needed to determine your device or your operating system. As of iOS 13, and if you're building a mobile app, this is really important for you. As of iOS 13, we are required to display every single notification that hits your phone. And when I say notification, it's not just the body of the text that you get from your friend that says, hey, what's up, are you coming to the conference? Notifications can be messages, phone calls, invitations to group chats, invitations to video chats. They can be message delivered, message sent, message opened notifications. And we don't want all of these things flooding your phone. It used to be that we could just send everything to the app, and the app would be able to handle what to do with that notification and how to display it. And it has to know things like, how do I display that notification? Because a call takes up an entire screen, but a message takes up just a square on that screen. So PushMe plays a really important role in, do we mute this notification, or do we actually send it to the phone? So that's PushMe in a nutshell, and now that we know how the notifications get to you, whether you're on your computer or on your phone, let's talk about how we can guarantee arrival and know that they're actually getting to where they need to be for 16 million daily notifications. The obvious answer, of course, is tracing. We ensure that the same trace ID is always used for the same notification, no matter which service it's in. But then the question becomes, well, how do we do that while separating the business logic from the infrastructure? We don't want a trace ID, floating all over our code, getting up in things that it has no relation to, right? For this, a very handy NPM package comes to the rescue. And this is relevant for you even if you're not trying to build a massive communications platform. It's called a continuation local storage, or CLS hooked, which uses async hooks in order to maintain something like a local storage for each notification, for each request session. If you're already using Node 14, there's an API that's built in that does exactly this. It allows basically for the trace ID to be saved in a local storage so that it can be retrieved for any log and any request at any point of the way. And for us, when I say this way, we care about 3 important points. One, upon entry to the service, right? We want to know when notifications are coming into the service. We want to log when they're leaving the service, and for every event that is logged within the service. And we wanted this to be part of the infrastructure instead of getting tangled in the rest of the logic. So that if you consider this part of the flow again, and we're looking at this a lot, and I hope you like it because I worked really hard on it. If we zoom in on this part of flow, imagine there's a push notification headed to your phone that you've got a message from your boss. As we said before, it is cute Mrs. Frizzle who sends that notification as a request to both the message queue and the HTTP service. And upon arrival to the HTTP service, there is a middleware that grabs that trace ID from the headers of the request and places them in the session's local storage. Now, various things happen within that service. Log stating the notification with trace ID, whatever, I can't see it from here, has arrived, and then another log to decide whether this guy signed up for push notifications, and another log right before the notification heads out. And using the middleware, that trace ID is added each time to the logs before they're written. And then, assuming you're accepting push notifications, and you are because it's your boss and this is important, the interpreter grabs the notification right before it heads to push me and tacks on that trace ID to the headers of the request. Now let's see what that looks like in the actual code of our HTTP service. So first of all, what we're going to do is create an instance of the CLS middleware like this. Again, this is built into Node 14 if you're already using that. And what you're seeing here is what intercepts the request when it arrives to the service. The middleware first checks whether the headers have a trace ID. And assuming it just arrived from Fizzle, then it should have a trace ID, but if it doesn't, then we create one. And once that is taken care of, you'll see that the trace ID is set on the CLS namespace. And that saves that ID to its local storage instance. So now that ID we've logged it, and now we can mind our business, right? Doing things, checking the database, everything we need to know. We checked if this guy signed up for push notifications. We've decided that you are. For each step, a log is written, and before it's sealed, it's stopped by the middleware again, which will add the trace ID to the log by taking it from the local storage, which you can see in the NS-GET. And finally, the same interpreter sits on Axios, the HTTP client, right before a request is about to go to another service. We catch the request right before it goes off. We take the trace ID from the local storage, which you can see, and add the trace ID to the header. Now, all of this ensures that the logger doesn't need to know anything about the trace ID. So CLS is super, super powerful for us in this context, but it doesn't have to be just for logging. It can be for any situation where you want to separate the business logic from the infrastructure, maybe in your application if you want information associated with your users or something like that. But it is particularly useful in this case when we've got millions of notifications going different places, because now, when PushMe finally sends that notification to your device, we have that final log with the trace ID in question, and we know that we've sent that notification to your phone, and that way if a message is headed for you and your phone didn't receive it, then we can put our hands up and blame the App Store, because don't we like placing the blame? This is a series of logs for a notification about an inbound call. These logs include actions, searches, inbound and outbound requests. They look similar to the other 720,000 notifications that might have been produced in the time that I was giving this talk. And if you look at the timestamps, I know it's super blurry. Wow, I'm sorry. It's not that interesting. I could tell you myself that the timestamps show that the notification is going from Frizzle to the HTTP service to PushMe in a matter of 4 milliseconds. And if we keep following those logs, we'll see information about the user. We'll determine which notifications are supposed to go to the user, and eventually, essentially the entire life cycle of this notification. So while these logs are a little bit boring and this isn't the heroic journey of a pink little louse that made it around the world, for all we know, this could be a notification that made it around the world in under 15 milliseconds and got exactly where it needs to go. Thank you.